Hello again, everyone. The pleasure of today, we thought to be like a nice conversation, which hopefully can help you to think about your future careers as well. It's my pleasure to have Sofia, Caroline, and Hazel with me today to join me in this conversation, which hopefully is going to bring diverse perspectives to how different starting points lead to different continuums. And that doesn't mean that's where it stops either. That the pathways in the industry and the working world in the world has changed so much compared to what it was before, right? And like how nimbleness is that much important in that space as well. So I have with me Dr. Hazel Bradshaw, who is an emerging technologies leader specializing in the exploration, development, and adoption of new technologies. Hazel has a doctorate in human interface technology, and she has been working in this space for longer than a decade, right? So on the other side, I have Sofia Piven. Sofia is one of our lecturers in the game art side of games department. She worked as a research assistant in University of Auckland and Victoria University before. And she's coming to us from an anthropology background, actually, and I find it incredibly fascinating. And I'm curious to see where that kind of union between anthropology and games is going to go, like in the long run. So, so that's really interesting. So in the middle, we have Caroline Tompkins. Caroline is one of our alumni, and she graduated in 2021 and currently working as a UI artist at the studio Ultradown. You may know them with their game Grimdark, right? Yes. And I am Tece Bayrak. I've been a lecturer at Media Design School for longer than 10 years now, and we have been running Awesome Games for 10 years as well. This is the 10th year, and it's my pleasure to bring this to you with the help of all the other volunteers that we have and also the participants that we have in the panel as well. Cool. So, with that introductions, I'm just going to kick it off quickly by allowing our panelists to tell us a little bit about themselves, their current roles, and I think actually with their job title, because sometimes job titles are just so interesting, and I think they're very changing. They're changing today as well, right? And also maybe tell us a little bit about what their current role includes, right? What's like day to day is like in your role in a way. Okay, if it is possible to explain, of course. Yeah. Okay. So maybe we start with Hazel.
Hi. So my current role the title is Emerging Technologies Practice Lead. So I suppose that means that there is a set of practitioners, and I will lead what they do and what we work on as far as emerging technologies. So, that makes me sound very loud. I'm not sure. So what we do in a range of emerging technologies is we look at things like way off in the distance, quantum computing, and then we look at things that are really close to us, such as things we can do with HoloLenses, so VR and AR. So I explore everything within that range, and then hopefully help people, our customers and our internal teams work across those. And I work for Datacom, who are a technology services company. So we're not a game company, even though I have a gaming background. So there's a lot of scope for where gaming can go in the future.
Well, anyway, I'm Caroline, as you know. I recently graduated from MTS. I'm working at Ultradown, which is a Auckland-based studio. It's quite small, and I'm a UI artist. And that essentially means,
yes, it does.
Yeah, so I'm a UI artist, and my day-to-day is kind of composed of a few different things. Yeah, I'm the only UI artist they have at the moment, so it's kind of just me and my art director working on it. So I'm handling a lot of the implementation side of it, getting it into the game, getting it functioning, and also animating it so it's responsive and impactful to use as before playing. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Sofia. I'm a lecturer in the games department alongside Tece. My day-to-day involves teaching about games as cultural artifacts and analyzing them from different lenses. So I'm looking at their mechanics, their visual design, their historical legacy, social impacts, and so on. So this is actually, I just finished teaching my first semester, so I'm quite new. And I also teach a bit on 2D art. So the previous course that was running focused a bit on concept art, a little bit on how we would apply traditional art fundamentals like perspective and so on, and how you could do that using industry software like Photoshop and principles of digital painting and so on. And those are the two kind of areas that I focused on so far. And my background is in anthropology, which is funnily quite fitting for what I do.
That's wonderful. So I guess adding to that, my background, even though I've been teaching for 10 years, is from defense industry. I worked as a software engineer at a company working for solutions for command and control systems for Navy ships. I'd like to think it's along the lines of Star Trek, like that you have those, Navy ships, although they're not really in space, like they have to somewhat communicate to one another. They have all these systems that work together, right? And I think among us, we have an interesting combination of, experience that's going around, right? And like a connection to games, no matter what, right? So I think it's only timely to ask about, what's your favorite game of all time? And, like anything that you enjoy playing these days, maybe, right? Go for it.
All right. What do I enjoy playing these days? Well, the game I think that had the most impact on my interest in games as a whole, I think it's a bit cliche to say, but it would have been equal between BioShock and the Assassin's Creed series. Assassin's Creed, funnily enough, actually sparked my interest in history. As a high school student, I was more very kind of biology focused, very sciencey, and playing Assassin's Creed and the historical aspects of the game and being able to explore Renaissance Venice really sparked a big interest in me in the social sciences and humanities, which I later went on to study at university and now have a postgraduate degree in. So it'd have to be Assassin's Creed and BioShock, and now I really enjoy playing games like Darkest Dungeon. It's really expanded from there.
Yeah, for me, I would say probably the game that had the most impact on me was the Elder Scrolls game, which is Oblivion. It's kind of the first game I ever really picked up and got into. And obviously that led me down this path into working with games. But yeah, most recently, I've been pretty obsessed with Elden Ring. It's very good.
Cool.
I was around when games kind of started coming onto consoles. So my first game I ever played was Pong, and I had Control. So I was just so happy that there was this thing I could interact with that gave me some control and some feedback. And it was only a couple of pixels bopping across the screen. So it was obviously had an impact on a very young mind. But obviously I told earlier this morning about my depths of despair with World of Warcraft, having got in there and gone from being this tiny little character doing knowing nothing into being in a massive raiding guild and going into big instances, defeating giant bosses. And I think that was maybe what broke me. And now it's kind of things like Monument Valley, which I find soothing and calming and helps me escape when I need to be in some other space. But I've really, and I do build still a lot of this VR. So I think I've moved into wanting to build in VR spaces and AR spaces. So kind of any of the games that are starting to fall through in there, those types of interactions really excite me.
That's wonderful. So, well, I think this is the moment to ask them, like, what is it that you like about games? You know, people say that games are just, waste of time. There's nothing about them whatsoever. They're like child's play. We play them anyway. And you know that I disagree with this completely, right? But I just want to hear, your opinions on that. Like, what is it that you like about games?
So I'll start. I like the fact that games give you an entire world to play in, and it's a world that's bounded by rules, but you still have a lot of choice. And it's also a fantasy, it's an escape, but you're also learning a lot of skills and you're applying them, and it really gives you a lot of what you don't necessarily get in real life, which is feedback on how well you're doing. And I think from a perspective of what we enjoy as human beings, they're an amazing microcosm of everything that we've been evolved to do. So I think games are really positive. They have an incredibly positive impact on our brains and our skills and our coordination. So I think they're actually a really good thing. And I went and did 4 years of study to research this, and I can say that that's actually really positive. So serious games are also really good. They can change the world.
Just kind of going off what she was saying, the escapism aspect was definitely very compelling. And beyond that, I think the potential of games as a storytelling medium is what makes them really interesting. The kind of things that you can do and experience in them just kind of, it doesn't compare to any other medium. Yeah.
I'll definitely agree with Caroline on this one. Games primarily interest me as this really deep storytelling medium. I think it's made obvious by the fact that game study scholars a lot of the time have to combine not only film theory but also literary theory to analyze a game in depth, because it seems to be this combination of different mediums with this interactivity aspect. And I think that has a lot of potential for really interesting storytelling. For me, I'm a massive book nerd, and I love to. I'm one of those people who will, if I'm faced with a blue curtain, I will say, it's a melancholy curtain. I'm one of those people that really likes to read into things, and I think games are perfect for that because there's so many elements that players have control over, from the visual design to the soundtrack to like spatiality in games, and how that can all be used to tell a particular story from a particular perspective is incredibly interesting to me.
Awesome. Okay, with that, maybe we should talk about some core skills that make these things happen. Hazel mentioned about how games can serve for greater purposes. I do tend to think that games are gonna save the world, by the way. Caroline said that games are a storytelling medium. And then Sofia said that because of the creative control that the developers have over it at many facets of the game itself, that it actually allows for really deep conversations, deep human conversations happening. So what are those core skills that these developers have, which would help them, create these interesting entities, if I can call them entities?
This will probably sound really dry, but I think at the base of all of this is some level of critical thinking. In my game studies lectures, I try to make the parallel between game design and academic writing, which off the bat kind of seems like, okay, where are you going with this? But I think both are predicated on being able to break down, analyze, and make connections. A good essay, like a good game, it depends on being able to know where your gaps are and being able to resolve them and make a solution. And I think that's a big part of making an impactful game, like knowing how to do it by being able to create a blueprint from the beginning, much like you would write an academic essay. I think that's a very general but very important transferable skill. So I would say critical thinking. Hopefully that's not too general.
I would personally say that working in the games industry, communication is probably the most important skill that I've kind of developed and found to be helpful. Obviously, games are generally made by teams, and beyond knowing like the fundamentals of how to make something and put it in a game and make it work, obviously like being a good communicator and working in a team is something that's harder to teach. It's something that you kind of learn through experience and trial and error. But it's genuinely very important to actually get things working, to get a product made.
Mine might sound a bit dry, but understanding systems, so systems design, systems thinking, because a game is a complex system, and it has many moving parts. And if you can understand and go through a communication, that journey as well between what the end goal of the game is and the system that it's going to take, including the software that it's going to take to be involved, the art, all of that, how that system works and functions, and how your game works and functions, and how you communicate that between teams is actually really, really a core skill, is being able to understand and work within a system and know what the kind of process is to go through that. So yeah, a little bit dry, but it's actually one of the key things to making things successful.
100% systems thinking. So with all these in mind, if we are exerting our muscles to use these skills day to day, shall we maybe think about how we have developed those skills? You know, what did you do, you know, in your background, over your studies, over your trainings, over your hobbies? You know, what do you think you did, and as a result, those skills are developed over time?
I played a lot of games. That's one thing. I think I was really curious as a kid. I was curious. I was a terrible child. I would be curious about something, take it apart and go, ooh, that's how it works, and then leave it. So I wasn't a finisher of things, but I was very curious about how they worked. And I think that's been a thread of how does this work? How does this connect? What does this mean? But I'm also a big sci-fi fan. So I want to see everything I ever saw as a child in the future, I wanted to make now. I want holodecks and I want all of this. And I wanted to bring the future to me now. And that's been a thread in my thinking. My core motivation is like, I want that and I want to see it now. How do I make that happen? So curiosity, and then the will to figure out the system to make that happen and bring it towards me. And then I do this every day. I bring it into my role at Datacom. I bring it into, and I show people what I'm excited about, and they get excited, and then I get excited, and it's all this fun that we can have playing around with this new technology. And I think fun, curiosity, and all of those kind of threads that you can pull really would make, a fascinating way to build a career.
Yeah, so I also played a lot of games, and I think that's an important thing for anyone who wants to make games to do. But aside from just playing them, I think also kind of analyzing as you're playing them, like what do you like about them? What in any kind of given moment of gameplay is adding to your experience? Is there anything taking away from it? I think just thinking really critically about the games you play and the games you enjoy, and applying obviously those kind of notes to your own work, or when you're approaching like a design problem even. I think games, like looking at other people's games, people have probably already solved those, and yeah, you just need to really take note of that and carry it forward.
I think I'm definitely similar to Hazel and Caroline both. I like to play games, but I was exposed to games, I think, in my kind of late teenagehood. Before that, I think for most of my life, I've been obsessed with primarily film and books. And one of the pastimes that I liked the most was watching a movie and thinking, would this work better as a book and why? Or reading a book and thinking, what would this look like as a movie and why? Why would this medium be a better storytelling medium than this one? Does camera offer something different than perspective in a piece of literature? And that's expanded even further now being exposed to games, and now it's this kind of three-way kind of activity where I play a game and I think maybe this would work better as a film. It's super linear. The characters are really fleshed out. Is there really a purpose of spending 12 hours with these characters when you can watch a TV show and maybe get even more out of it through the cinematography or the way the camera angles work? And the same with games and books and books and games and so on. And I think that in a way has latently developed my ability to critically think. It's also really fun. And having an anthropology background and having to write a lot of essays, I think also contributed to that.
I think Sofia brought the conversation to an interesting place. How media uses perhaps in some ways same storytelling methods, but differently based on the way that you have to kind of present that. Therefore, sometimes one feels more suitable than the other. But then there are really interesting transitions between all of them, right? And I want to take that one step further. It's not only that there are transitions between different forms of media, but there are transitions between media and technology. Technology and other forms of areas that has been around maybe much longer than the technology that we are kind of commonly used to these days, right? And in fact, the rise of or the kind of the inclination of how things go fast over the last 2 decades, which probably is marked with some of the interesting devices introduction to the society, right? I remember quite vividly the time when we had the world in our palm, which wasn't in the size of a clam phone, size. So that certainly has changed a lot of things. And I don't think we can imagine a day when we can't reach the, internet from wherever we are anymore, right? It's just so normal. Well, all I am trying to say is that this kind of technology, something like a black box, and its connection with everything else, I am actually very curious about your thoughts regarding what's that connection, what kind of different roles, what kind of different pathways that connection actually has started offering, right? I don't think 50 years ago there was a job called futurist, for example. Now we have people who are futurists, whatever that means. So what are some roles that you think are novel, are changing, the roles of future? What are your thoughts on these?
So speaking from a purely kind of academic perspective, this may be a little bit of a dry observation, but what I found really interesting is with games increasing in popularity so exponentially in the past 2 decades or so, it's been really interesting diving into the legacy of the game studies field, which is so new. And coming from a background of anthropology, where the field of anthropology, which is, for those of you who have maybe not heard that word before, is the study of human cultures, and it's very similar to sociology and learning about societies and people's attitudes and so on. Anthropology is a very old field. There's our very clearly established theories. There's legendary scholars from 50 years ago that everyone just bows down to. Well, not really, but it's interesting recently, due to the nature of my job as a lecturer, being able to become exposed to this field that's rapidly expanding, but is still in its kind of, not in its nascent state, but it's still maturing. And comparing that to my background, it's just fascinating as these new technologies develop and games become recognized as something that is worthy of proper academic study, and theories are beginning to be developed around game studies, and not just taking the theory from like film studies and applying it to games. People actually developing within game studies their own theories. That's really exciting. It's like this birth and maturing of an academic field, which has been really interesting to follow.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Sophia, though. Obviously, I'm not as educated as she is on the field of game studies, but kind of coming to MDS and learning about that there was kind of whole field of academic study surrounding games that have kind of only been formalized early in like the past 20 years was extremely fascinating to me. It's kind of being able to like read a game as a text essentially and kind of work out what's the that's by far the most kind of interesting thing about the very kind of rapidly changing field that is games. But I guess speaking from the industry, in terms of the industry itself, I think people tend to be looking for people that have kind of skills in multiple areas these days. Like obviously it's great if you're an amazing artist, but also being an amazing artist that can do a little bit of code and help get things into the game, help get them working. I think that's probably what we'll see more of going forward, rather than people just sticking to kind of one discipline.
Cool. I suppose I work in that future space, and part of what I do, looking at these new technologies that come through, are what are the roles that will wrap around them in the future. And part of one of the things I look at is future environments, and work will change. So at the moment we're in this very strange space because of the pandemic, where we left all the offices and we started working at home. And that changed how we interacted, and we do a lot more of our working at a distance and over the internet. And you'll have done this probably when you've been through school, you've been at home, you've had to work in different ways. So as this becomes more, it won't go backwards, this change is always going to push you forwards. You're going to find a lot more spaces where we interact online, which means that we're going to start abandoning a lot of our face-to-face. So we'll start creating these online spaces. At the moment, everyone's shouting metaverse. And it's kind of true in a way, but there are a lot more online shared spaces. So people will need people who look after those spaces, who build them, who curate them, who design the way that we interact with them, who bring in content that's digital content into that. So it's a hybrid way that we will work. And that means there's a bunch of roles in there to do with AI, to do with spatial design, to do with digital twins. So in the future, you may have a role where you take the stuff that you've learned in game design and you apply that into building worlds where there's a digital twin. And a digital twin is just like an interactive digital copy of a physical thing, space or environment. And we are looking at building a digital twin of New Zealand. So you may work in that in the future. So you may look after that as part of your industry role. And to me, it's all linked back to games, because a lot of these things are built with game engines. So your skills are going to be really, really valuable.
That was wonderful. Thank you. Okay. So this is going to be my last question, because I want to open the ground for Q&A, right? And I bet that there are some questions burning in the crowd as well, right? So perhaps thinking about this question as an advice for your past self, what would you tell them? What would your advice be knowing that they are about to graduate from high school, that you are about to graduate high school, and in the process of choosing a career, what would you advise?
Okay, I would advise myself, thinking about myself, don't rush, don't worry, you have time. You have time to figure it out. You have time to change your mind. You have time to just do something else, another different thing. So there's always time to change. I have done 3 or 4 different iterations of my career. I've done 3 or 4 different iterations of what I want to do. There's always time. You may not feel it, but you can change. So go with what speaks to you. I don't want to do the cliche of whatever your passion is, but what speaks to you, and just kind of go with that. For me, it was art and the curiosity of finding out how these worlds worked and making worlds. So that's what I would say to myself is, don't worry, you've got time.
Yeah, so my advice would definitely be to study something that really interests you or that you enjoy, if you can, obviously. I know that's like cliche, but that's what I did, and I think if you're gonna spend like several years and quite a bit of money getting an education, you might as well enjoy it. And also, as we've been talking about, there's just the world is rapidly changing, and there's a lot of kind of unorthodox career pathways these days. So I think study what you love, and you'll end up somewhere where you want to be.
Yeah, I think unsurprisingly my advice would be quite similar to both Hazel's and Caroline's. I would just add, I mean, you're finishing high school, you're finished nearing the end of high school. Throw everything like at the wall. I'm not going to swear on, but just throw crap at the wall and see what sticks, and whatever it calls to you and beckons to you. Then, like, if it's 2 or 3 things, explore those 2 or 3 things. Don't specialize early. In terms of practical advice, getting very similar to what Caroline was saying, getting a very broad education. I personally, I hold a arts degree that enabled me to explore everything I could ever want to explore. And when you do that, later down the line, you have fewer regrets because you've tried pretty much everything out and you've decided, okay, actually, this does work best for me. So I think to sum it up, just explore and experiment because you have a lot of time, and don't try to narrow yourself too early.
Wonderful advice. Okay, so any questions from the crowd then? Anything on that? Yes.
How easy would you say it was to get a job in the gaming community after leaving school, obviously?
Well, for me, I would say it was pretty easy. It's probably not the norm, but the group I was working with in third year, we all got offers from A44 in Wellington, kind of straight out of the end of the year. Obviously, I turned that down. I didn't want to move out of Auckland just yet. But yeah, there's definitely quite a lot of jobs out there. I found that they've actually slowed down kind of in the middle of the year, but there were a lot at the start of the year. And I think the New Zealand games industry is like it's only expanding. It's getting bigger every year. So there's definitely jobs out there for people. I don't think that's like a lack of jobs is anything to worry about.
Cool. Yes.
How do you go into jobs? Like, I know you said that there's lots of opportunities, but how do you like go into one? You didn't have a specific degree for like games. I do, but like not directly. Direct game.
Yeah, and
in Caroline's case, she has a games degree actually. So Caroline has a Bachelor of Creative Technologies Game Arts degree, which majors in game art. Maybe you would like to take it from there.
Yeah. So I studied at MBS. I studied here, and that's where I was up until last year, when I graduated. Actually, we haven't graduated yet technically, but so that's a pretty straightforward career path, I think. Because the course that I did is so focused on the games industry, I think it's quite easy to kind of transition into the industry from there, because you've kind of already had experience with a lot of the skills and the workflow that they're looking for, like working in a team to essentially put out a final product.
Yeah, go for it.
With job opportunities as well, obviously you can seek them out on websites like Seek and so on. Another pathway, I explored this a little bit. I actually have a diploma from media design school before I started my anthropology studies. And one thing I did during my diploma is start an online portfolio and also sign up to freelance websites where people can find you and commission you to do work. That way you're becoming kind of self-employed, and you have a lot of control over what kind of work you take on. And that's something that's actually quite realistic to do while you are studying, if that's of interest. So you can I guess being active about I don't necessarily need to find a job, I can create one for myself.
I just want to add to that from a sort of big tech company perspective. We do support a lot of interns, and we do things like DataCamp, and we do hackathons. So we engage communities, and it's a really great way to just come in and have some fun like you've had today, but also you meet a lot of people, and it's the network that you create, and then you can show your skills in the eyes of someone. So doing things like that, attending like the New Zealand Games Festival, there's lots of things you can go to, which just get you into people's radar. And we at DataCon, we bring in a lot of interns, and we actually employ people directly from internships. So there's a really close stream, and we won't be the only technology services company that does that. And we do employ a lot of artists, and we employ a lot of technologists, and we employ a lot of people who will be creating the environments of the future as well. So it's definitely worth kind of seeing what internships are out there for things like Microsoft or Datacom or IBM, etc. Because we do bring people in and we work with them to develop their skills over their career paths.
That's an awesome next step to any education, isn't it? Education in the workplace as a part of the workplace. Any other questions? Don't be shy.
Can I make a suggestion to see if you want to talk about the two games-oriented bachelors that we have, so that they can get an understanding of like the basics of the Bachelor of Creative Technologies and Software Engineering?
Okay, sure. Well, under the games department's umbrella, we do have 2 degrees, one of them being the Bachelor of Software Engineering Game Programming degree, essentially majoring in game programming. And then the other one is Bachelor of Creative Technologies Game Arts degree, which is majoring in game art. And throughout the time frame of their studies, the students who come through these 2 degrees work together throughout, which is an important element of working in the industry, whichever industry you go to, really, because it kind of hones your skills in terms of, understanding each other's language, understanding the scope of a project, and obviously working towards a goal together, right? And in both of those degrees, students have an opportunity to explore various areas of programming and art in their respective specializations, obviously. And it's interesting enough, even though these are mainly focusing on creating industry-ready graduates for games industry, many of our graduates have gone to work on quite different industries as well. So we had quite a few of them working at Orion Health, at Fisher & Paykel Health, at Build Media, for example, which is a company that does a lot of visualization. So even though they are studying mainly games, and that's what I find fascinating, because they all came in to work in games, they kind of tend to somewhat go to like a sidestep other direction, work in other areas where they can apply whatever they learned in the process of being trained for game development, right? And similarly, in many studios in the industry, you would find people who are right now working in games, perhaps, but coming from different walks of life. For example, and I had a friend working at Gameloft years ago, and he was essentially a finance consultant. And he started working at the studio because the games, the mobile games, has a huge economy. Like, you need to build an economy in it. And the idea of economy actually comes from finance. It has been around for like forever, right? So I think that's that fascinating reality, which Hazel mentioned before already. Anything that has a system, that has a rule, can be applied to games, right? Therefore, I do say with confidence that any role has a chance to end up in games industry somewhat. And also that I say games are going to save the world somewhat someday, because the knowledge that you develop as you're thinking about games, as you're playing games, as you're studying games, as you're analyzing games, they create insights into the psychology of not only your environment, but also the systems that you are interacting with, right? I bet a game designer would design a much better transport system for Auckland. I bet a game designer would design a much better government policy for the government. I hope this is not going to put me in a tough spot later. But I hope you understand what I mean, because we're talking about the psychology. We're talking about enjoyment, which kind of makes people feel like they want to invest in something rather than drag their feet towards that, right? So would you not be happier if everything felt just so flow, like everything had like so much happiness built into it? And I think that's possible with games. So I hope that kind of answers your question in both ways. Not only that the programs that we kind of deliver help people find jobs in the games industry, but also, those different pathways are possible, vice versa. Cool. Any other questions from the ground? Yes.
If you take a different art course, like for example, like other degrees you get from here, could you still go into like game design? So like for example, like art one, would you still be able to work with art?
I think so. It's all about investment. I don't think there are any kind of hard walls around whatsoever, right? And to be honest, you may, study specifically game art, but then you may realize that you don't necessarily want to work in the industry, right? You may just go study anthropology, and then you may realize that it actually sparks some interest into like different mediums. You know what I mean? So I don't think like those hard walls, as we thought about the world in the past, exist anymore. And the people you talk to, clearly not this kind of bunch, but the people you talk to may tell you otherwise. But I think what we advise is somewhat limited to what we're used to. And I think that's why it's wonderful to have these beautiful ladies here, because they are, they play at the edge, you know what I mean? They combine different areas together. And I hope that kind of gives you some insight about how things are more fluid rather than being rigid as you may imagine them to be from where you are right now. Awesome question, thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
For the game art course specifically, what kind of like disciplines are covered or like explored within that? A lot.
To confirm, a lot. From personally speaking, game studies, the main theory course throughout the game art degree covers a lot about the theory of how to approach games from historical, societal, political, all the perspectives. You also learn about the principles of game design. It's a very comprehensive bag. Would you like to speak in more detail?
No, I think what you said is great. Rather than me, I actually would like perhaps, yes, Caroline, to maybe speak to it a little bit.
Yes, so from my perspective, I would say that the game art course is quite focused on 3D art, just in terms of what they teach, because I think that's something that most people kind of haven't had much experience with before. Like, I know most of you have probably done like some form of like art class or painting class at school, but it's also got like quite a high barrier to entry as well. So I think it's definitely very beneficial to learn it from people that kind of know and can help you. But I think the class also kind of encourages a lot of like kind of self-directed learning. Like if you are interested in something, go out and kind of investigate more, and the lectures can absolutely help you with that and give you feedback on your work.
Cool. I think I'll just say we have one motto in the department. We do say that game art is technical and game programming is creative. And I stand behind this quite strongly, because when you kind of put these things together, game art being very technical and game programming being very creative, you create magic actually, And that's that magic which reaches to you when you play a game, like that you want to come back and play, that you want to kind of spend more time with it, that you want to, explore it more. And we as a department try our best to stay behind that motto as well, in terms of providing the core skills, the fundamentals, the baseline, or sometimes the directions that people can go starting from that, really. Yeah. Any other questions? Cool. Well, I guess then we perhaps can end with that if we don't have any other questions. Okay. Well, thank you very much for making the time to have this chat with us. And I hope we kind of brought some insight to potential places that you may go in the future for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, with that, we're gonna close the day with our awards ceremony. Okay, we have like some little awards that